There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. There is a time for everything, and God makes everything beautiful. For us to find purpose and meaning in this life under the sun, we have to go to the sun. Jesus is the reason. He's the one that gives us purpose. He's the one that is the meaning of life.
I have noticed as I'm up here today that I have a special shirt on, and some of you may be able to see it's representing Schoolhouse Rock. Anyone watch Schoolhouse Rock? Oh, wow. Look at that. We got more claps for that versus multi-generational serving. I don't know what that says about our hearts this morning. No, I'm just kidding. I enjoyed watching Schoolhouse Rock. I loved it. Multiplication, I learned how a bill becomes a law. You learned that as well. If you asked me to sing that for you today, I actually don't remember it, so don't judge me for it. But I still have fond memories of watching Schoolhouse Rock. And their catchphrase that maybe you can see, maybe you can't, but it says, knowledge is power, right? Knowledge is power. It also it reminds me, and I can't remember what TV station Schoolhouse Rock was on. Does anyone remember? 7. It was ABC. Okay, so their rival, NBC, if you remember, and sometimes they show this old commercial, and it has like the do-do-do, and it says, the more you know. I don't know if that was the right do. I don't know if that's right. That's why I preach. I don't sing. I don't carry a tune, all right? So that phrase, the more you know, knowledge is power. It's this great thing, and as a kid growing up, especially in the 90s, early 2000s, this is kind of really when in our country, this pursuit of education and higher education really became a priority. And for better or for worse, we can talk about that later. That's just kind of how things began to transpire over the last 30, 40 years in our country. Now, it's interesting to note the famous American author, Ernest Hemingway, he wrote many of his books in the 40s and 50s and then passed away, I believe, late 50s, early 60s. But there was a book that was re-edited that he never published, but then it was published in 1986. They went back and found it, made a few tweaks, and then they published it in 1986, the book, The Garden of Eden. And here's what he has to say. Remember, he's one of the brightest, smartest, most knowledgeable, intelligent people in our American history. And here's what he has to say about knowledge. He writes this: happiness in intelligent people is the rarest thing I know. Happiness in intelligent people is the rarest thing I know. Which is ironic, right? Because he's one of the smartest people that's lived here within our country. And some of his works is just so brilliant, and his writing is amazing. We study it in our classes, in our education system, and it's hard for us to even understand some of the complexities that he writes about and the things that he's speaking into. And yet he says, happiness in intelligent people is the rarest thing I know. What in the world is this guy talking about, right? We use his stuff for educational purposes, and he says, hey, the more that you know, the less happy you will be. But that's not what they taught me in Schoolhouse Rock, right? Knowledge is power, and the more that I know, the better things will be. And as I get smarter, I'll be happier. And even in our society today, if you have more degrees and you pursue more education, it's supposed to be better for you. It sets you up for further success. It gives you more career opportunities. The smarter than you are, the more opportunities you have, the happier you will be. And yet Ernest Hemingway says, not so much. Does that mean my childhood is just a complete sham? And everything I grew up of, I just got to throw out the window? What in the world is going on? What's interesting is that in this series that we started last week called What in the World, we are looking to God's Word to find wisdom to help us make sense of this crazy circus-like world that we live in today. And not only to make sense of these things, but also to find what? Meaning, purpose, satisfaction here in this life. Like that, we want to find wisdom in it. And so we're going to go to a book of the Bible written by the wisest person who's ever lived. His name is King Solomon. And if you were here last week when we started this series, we did kind of like an autobiography or a biography on King Solomon's life. We did an origin story to learn more about who he is and how he got to this place of gaining this great wisdom. So if you missed that, make sure you go back on our website, YouTube channel, wherever you get your podcast at, and listen to that sermon. It gives us a great short history on King Solomon, how he got to that place of being the wisest, most knowledgeable person who's ever lived. But today, we're going to begin listening to his wisdom, learning from his wisdom and knowledge. And what I think we're going to find that may surprise us is that the basis of his wisdom and knowledge sounds less like Schoolhouse Rock and more like Hemingway. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. If you're grabbing a Bible from the seat back in front of you, it's going to be on page 539. It's going to be on page 539. And as you're turning there, just want to remind you that here at Avenue, we do teach from God's Word every week because we believe God has primarily spoken to us through his Word, the Bible. And not only do we believe the Bible is God's Word, and that's true, but that's very applicable to our lives today. So Ecclesiastes is this word that means the gathered assembly. So what Solomon is doing here in Ecclesiastes, the book of Ecclesiastes, is he has gathered the people of Israel to sit down and to listen to him. The idea of Ecclesiastes connects with this word in the Greek language that's called ecclesia. And maybe if you've heard this term ecclesia before, you may realize that it's where we get our word church from, the gathered assembly. So what Solomon is kind of doing in Old Testament style, he's kind of gathering people together for church, and he's going to share with them some wisdom that he has learned from God over the years. Now, before we look at the wisdom he has to share, let's be very clear on what we mean, what we're talking about from God's word when it comes to what wisdom is. So you can throw that definition of wisdom up on the screen. Here it is. Wisdom is what? Knowing God's word and following God's way. Wisdom is knowing God's word and then following God's way. And so Solomon, his whole point in writing Ecclesiastes is to help people see, hey, I want you to know God's word. I want you to know how to live your life and then follow his way for your life. I don't want you just to know God's word and then do whatever you want. I also don't want you just to feel connected to God and live however you want to be, but not know it. I want you to know both. That is true wisdom, knowing God's word and following God's way. And so here we go, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, starting in verse 1, Solomon lays out the foundation for us as to what true wisdom from God is all about. Here it is. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 says this, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. All right, there's some wisdom for you right there, right? Hold on a second, Solomon, you're the wisest person to ever live. You've experienced everything. You have knowledge that surpasses all of us, and you're telling us at the end of your life, you've gathered us all together. We're here to sit down to listen from you, and you start by saying that everything is meaningless? What in the world are you talking about, right? Well, it's very interesting how he starts off with this word meaningless. Maybe you've seen this word in different Bible translations. The word comes up as vain or vanity. And there's other translations where it talks about how this idea of, and the Hebrew word here is the word hevel, and you can throw this picture up to the screen. This word hevel, it brings to light this idea, this concept of smoke or vapor. Something that is here, you can see it, but then it goes away. After church today, if you go to Pastor Johnny in the kids' wing and you say, hevel, 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 he'll be so happy. It's his favorite Hebrew word. Why? I don't know. I still haven't figured it out. But ever since we talked about this series, he's been so excited. He just walks around the church in the office just saying, hevel, hevel, hevel. So I don't know why he does it, but say it to him, you put a smile on his face. All right? So this idea of hevel really has this idea of smoke, a vapor. That's something that is here, but then it is gone. That it is temporary. That I can see it for a moment, but it doesn't last forever. And so what Solomon is saying right away, the foundation of wisdom here on this earth, is that everything is temporary. Everything is here today and gone tomorrow. Now, the question is, what is this everything? Is it like everything, or is it just an everything? Or is it everything over, like, what is everything he's talking about? Well, he makes it very clear in these following verses here in verses 3 and following. So he says that, verse 3 and 4. It says, what do people gain from all of their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. We'll stop right there. So in verses 3 and 4, he tells us that whatever you and I gain by our work, we don't actually get to keep forever. Like whatever you and I make in this life, guess what? Our bank account doesn't go with us after we pass away. And on top of that, there's always more to gain. There's always more to earn. There's always more in this life, and yet we can never have enough of it. And he says, hey, generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. So even if you get more and more and more, you can't keep it all. And the next generation, they get more and more and more, and they can't keep it all. So that's part of the everything. Then verse 5, he says this, the sun rises and the sun sets, and it hurries back to where it rises. Then verse 6, the wind blows to the south and it turns to the north, round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. And then verse 7, all streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. So in these 3 verses, he uses 3 different things in nature. You have the sun, the wind, and water. And they are all a part of this cycle that just comes and goes, and it comes and goes. And the sun rises, and then it sets, and then it's going to come back again. And then the wind, it blows one way, and it blows another way, and it's going to come back again. And then water comes down from the heavens, right? And then it goes into the rivers, and they go into the sea, and then it evaporates and goes back up to the clouds, and it keeps going and going. I'm sure there was a schoolhouse rock about that, right? I'm sure there was. And it just keeps going. It's just a cycle. Over and over and over again. There's nothing that can stop that. It just continues to happen. And so that's part of the everything is meaningless as well. Then verse 8 says this, all things are wearisome, more than one can say. And then the eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. So we have the sun, we have the wind, we have the streams, we have those 3 things in nature, and now he makes it very personal. And he says, hey, you can't have more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear has its fill of hearing. So now he's saying, hey, what's out there we can't control. It's in a cycle. And then what we can gain and enjoy by what we say, by what we see and what we hear, well, at the end of the day, it just leaves us wearisome. Because we can't get enough of it anyway. It never fills, it never fully satisfies. And yet, here we are in this cycle of seeing it, experiencing it, talking about it. So he's using this 3-fold pattern to talk about nature as well as our personal experience. That's part of the everything that is meaningless. And then he ends by this, verse 9 and 10. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? No, it was here already long ago. It was here before our time. Many of you have experienced this in the last 5 years. You've seen some fashions that many teenage and 20-something girls and guys are wearing these days, and you're like, that looks familiar. Let me go back in my closet. Yep, I still have that. Look I'm hip and cool now. Look at this new thing I have from 1970, 1980, whatever it is, right? There is nothing new under the sun. It's a continuous cycle that happens over and over and over again. And no matter what we see, what we say, no matter what we hear, no matter what we experience, it doesn't change. It just keeps happening over and over and over and over again. And then he drops this wisdom bomb on us. And here in verse 11, he's just so smart, right? No one remembers the former generations. And even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Now, what he isn't saying here is that no one remembers anyone. He remembers Adam and Eve. He remembers who God is. He knows who Moses. So he's not saying that in particular. But what he is telling us is that even worse, that this everything is meaningless. But guess what? Life's going to keep going on. So when you and I pass from this world, generations come, generations go, guess what? The world's going to keep going on its cycle. The sun's not going to remember if you're here or not. The sun's going to keep going up and it's going to keep going down. The wind's going to keep blowing away and blowing the other. We got rain to the water, to the rivers, to the sea, back up into the clouds. That's going to keep happening. They don't care if you're living or not. All of this cycle that we are a part of here on this earth is meaningless. It's hevel. It's temporary. The reality of the temporary is such a stark reality sometimes in our life. This past Thursday, my daughter Nora, who's in 4th grade, one of her classmates, her father, who's quite a bit older than we are, he passed away due to kidney failure. You have to go to a funeral or a wake on Thursday, and then the family has a funeral on Friday, and then guess what? Saturday still happens. Today's going to happen. Tomorrow, this week, Nora's classmate's going to have to go back to school. He's going to have to continue to learn. Life doesn't stop just because his dad isn't here anymore. This Friday, our daughter Sophie, who was stillborn at 38 weeks, we're going to celebrate her 3rd birthday. She should be here with us, and she's not. And guess what? For these last 3 years, life has continued on. The sun doesn't care that she's not here with us. The wind doesn't care that she's not here with us. It just keeps going. The water and the seas, they don't care that she's not here with us. And we still have to go on being a married couple. We still have to go on parenting Nora and Max. We still have to go on living our life. This doesn't feel like great wisdom, Solomon. And for those of you that have lost loved ones in the course of your life, you get this. You don't get to just turn the dial down on the grief and the sorrow. You don't get to turn the dial down on the temporary aspect of our life. It just is. Everything is vain. It's meaningless. It's temporary. It's here today and it's gone tomorrow. And yet the earth just keeps spinning. Well, maybe Solomon will give us some hope here, right? End of chapter 1. He's got to give us some hope, right? Here we go. Verse 12. We'll keep going. We'll keep getting into it. He says this, I, the teacher, I was keen over Israel and Jerusalem. Pause right there. At this point, Israel is the dominant country, the dominant world power. Greatest country in all of the known world. Nothing can compare to Israel at this point under Solomon's reign. He's a big deal, right? He's not saying in a cocky, arrogant way. He's just saying like, dude, I got it all right? Verse 13, I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. I have so much wisdom. I have so much time. I can study this stuff forever, quote unquote. And he says this, what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind, because it's difficult to take some of this in. Verse 14, I have seen all the things that are done under the sun, and all of them are hevel. They're meaningless. They are a chase scene after the wind. Verse 15, what is crooked can't be straightened. What is lacking can't be counted. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. And then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. So not only is he the smartest, he's the wisest, he's the most knowledgeable, he keeps getting wiser. He keeps getting more and more understanding and knowledge. And what does he say? It's hevel. It's meaningless. It's vain. It's chasing after the wind. It's going to keep happening. The cycles in this life are going to keep happening regardless if I know about it or don't know about it. I think this is maybe where we get that phrase, well, it is what it is, right? It is what it is. Can't do anything about it. Just is. That's what he's saying here. And then verse 18, the last verse we'll look at this morning. From with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Well, maybe Hemingway was right. That happiness eludes those who are intelligent. The more that you know, the not better off it is. Maybe, just maybe, ignorance is bliss. We're done with chapter 1. Let's go take communion, and we'll pray, and we'll worship, and we'll send you out, right? What I want us to do for a moment is I want us to camp out on this idea and concept of hevel. Meaningless, vain, a vapor, a smoke. Because sometimes when we read this and we look at this, we feel like we're in this cynical cycle of this cruel and unusually terrible world. Like it's just going to happen regardless of what we do, and it's just make us cynical and critical. There's nothing to do about it because everything is meaningless. Well, in the right perspective. Let's think about hevel for a moment. It's this concept of everything is a smoke. It's a vapor. So it's here today, it's gone tomorrow. So let's maybe use the word here for a moment, temporary. That everything is temporary here that we get to experience. The sun rises, it falls. The earth spins, and the wind comes, and the water. It's temporary. The things that we work for and the money that we receive for our work, it's temporary. The relationships that we have right here on this earth, they're temporary. Our lives are temporary. But it's in the temporary that we actually can find meaning and purpose and hope. It's when we understand that this world is temporary, it allows us to see it for what God has designed it to be. In fact, our big idea this morning from chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes is that life has meaning when it's lived as temporary, not eternal. Life has meaning when it's lived as temporary, not eternal. You and I can find meaning, purpose, satisfaction, hope in this life when we view everything as hevel, when we view everything as temporary. Now, what Solomon will show us in the weeks ahead is that having a right perspective on the temporary will allow us to find joy and satisfaction and contentment in many temporary things. There's nothing wrong with that. God has created these things for enjoyment, for pleasure, for satisfaction, even if they are temporary. But you have to put the temporary in its right place, understanding that what we have right now is temporary and is different than what the eternal is. And Solomon's not the only one to write about this. But I want to paint this picture for you before I talk a little bit about something that Jesus had to say at the beginning part of his ministry, and we see 10 different times recorded in the gospel accounts. If you remember, King Solomon, he built the most magnificent temple for the people of God, the people of Israel in Jerusalem. And the purpose of this temple was to be a permanent home for the presence of God. They had the Ark of the Covenant there. We talked about the Ark of the Covenant last few Sundays here, and it had certain things inside of it that reminded the people of God of God's faithfulness. and God's presence would dwell in there, and the temple would be a part of that. But ultimately, Solomon knew that God's presence there in the temple was still temporary. That there would be a new heavens and a new earth, and how much Solomon really knew of that, we don't fully know. But he knew that the Messiah was going to come back, that God was going to come and he's going to redeem and restore his people. So even this glorious, magnificent, quote unquote, permanent temple was still going to be a temporary place for God's presence. God was going to dwell and walk with his people once again, like he did in the garden with Adam and Eve. Solomon knew this. He knew everything he was building was still temporary, because there is an eternity that's waiting for us that God wants to invite us into. And we see that Jesus Christ, when he lived on this earth, he spoke a lot about it. In John chapter 3, verse 14, he makes reference to this scene in the Old Testament in which Moses had to hold up this staff that looked like a snake, and the people of Israel had to look to it, and they received forgiveness of sins because they had messed up completely again, not a surprise, and they looked to it to receive forgiveness, and it was a sign of God's presence, not like this serpent or snake staff thing forgave them. God forgave them. This is just a symbol for them to look at. And so Jesus makes reference to this in light of his conversation about eternity. And look what he has to say. John chapter 3, verse 14, he says this: "Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man may be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have" what? Eternal life in him. And then John 3:16. Maybe you've heard this verse before. "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have" what? Eternal life. You see, there is an eternity waiting for all of us. And because of Jesus' perfect life and death and resurrection, we have an opportunity to step into that eternal, forever perfect life in relationship with God. And we only receive that eternal life because of our faith in Jesus and Jesus alone, nothing else. And yet, right now in the temporary, our hearts, and Solomon will write about this later, we desire for that eternity. This is why we live in a culture today that is very similar to cultures previously that have this desire to live as long as possible, to extend life, to do things to prolong this thing, because we have this desire inside of us to make what is temporary eternal, because we want eternity. But the reality is that this is temporary. But when Jesus returns, or we pass from this temporary world, we get to experience eternity. We get to experience what God has imprinted on our hearts and our souls and our lives. And the only way for us to truly find satisfaction and meaning in this life is to realize that it's just temporary, that eternity is awaiting us someday. So we have to realize that I don't need to pursue eternity right now. I have to understand that things are temporary. No, just because things are temporary doesn't mean we get to do whatever we want, right? Because wisdom is knowing God's word and following God's way. And so that this word, hevel, once again, it's an important word that we understand because it paints a picture of the purpose that we have in our temporary. Think about just that idea of smoke, right? Or a vapor. Some of you maybe experienced this summer. You're around a fire pit in your backyard or a campfire, and you got your marshmallow stick, and you're out there and you're trying to roast the marshmallows, and that wind that comes and goes all the time, it shifts, and that smoke, whoo, it catches you in your face. You're like, oh, that's terrible. And then you go on the other side of it, and you're trying to do it, and then you see the marshmallow go up, and you blow it out, and then more smoke gets in your face, and it's just the smoke, it's having this impact on you. It's temporary, right? It'll go past you, go around, but it has an impact. And then later on that night, you go inside, you're talking hand with friends, and then you maybe go off into a different room, and your friends leave or family leaves, and you sit down, and you're like, oh, what's that smell? and you're trying to figure out, you go into the garbage, you're like, well, nothing's in there, and maybe I should take it out, or maybe I'll do that tomorrow when I'm reminded that I need to take it out. And so you go there, and you go somewhere else, and then you're like, oh, my shirt smells terrible. It smells like Hevel, all right? It smells like Hevel, right? That smoke that hits you just for a split second out there, you're around it for a while, it has impacted you. It makes you smell terrible, right? And so then, you got to take off your clothes, you got to change, you got to take a shower because you don't want to go to bed smelling like that, right? See, the temporary has impact. And the way God has designed this cyclical world is that the temporary does have eternal impact. See, there is meaning and there is purpose in our temporary endeavors, in our temporary experiences, because it can change the course of our eternity and the eternity of those around us. Some of you are sitting here today because of someone who had a temporary life that is no longer here with us on this temporary world, but they told you about Jesus Christ. They invited you to church. They had an investment in your life at some time, and though they're not here anymore because they are temporary, it has changed your eternity forever. And your temporary life and the interactions that you have with people, it can change their eternity forever when you practically show and you verbally share the love of Jesus with them. But not only in that, and this is kind of where I want to land the plane at this morning, is that there are many temporary experiences and things that we do that have eternal impact. And God has designed this temporary earth and designed us as created in his image, that when we receive eternal life in Jesus Christ, we have opportunities for however many days the Lord gives us here on this earth to have eternal impact on those around us. And so I want to list a few just for you guys to begin to think about and pray about this morning as to how God wants to use you in your temporary situation to have eternal impact on those around you. And so in your temporary jobs, you realize that your words and your actions can change someone's eternity by altering their view on what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. You have that impact. You, as a temporary, Hevel human being, can have eternal impact on those around you. In your temporary families, you can prioritize things in your schedule and your calendar that have eternal impact on your kids' faith, on your spouse's faith, instead of putting all of your marbles and desires in the things like that are temporary. Sports, hobbies, comforts, experiences. Nothing wrong with those things. But you can prioritize your life in this temporary life that we have to have eternal impact on those that you're closest with. In your temporary neighborhoods and communities, you can prioritize the relationships over the status that you're trying to keep of yourself, to try to keep up with the Joneses, and instead invest in these relationships, because those relationships actually can last forever in eternity. But the bank account that you use to keep up with the Joneses, guess what? You can't take that with you. With your temporary time and talent and treasure, you can surrender it for the good of others instead of just hoarding it only for yourself, because giving it away, not holding on to it, can have an eternal impact. Yeah, you can go serve at a food pantry. And those 2 hours and maybe the $20 that you donate for or whatever, guess what? That could change someone's temporary situation to have an eternal impact on them. Even with death, it's a reminder that this world is temporary and that the relationships we will have in eternity will be way more satisfying than any relationship here on this earth. That's a hard one, right? The little baby girl that I never got to hold while she was alive here on this earth. Oh, I can't wait for my relationship with her someday. that the loved one that you lost this past week, this past month, that you cherish so many long years and memories with, you got such an amazing relationship waiting for them in eternity. And what does that do? It brings you comfort. It brings you hope. It brings you healing in the midst of this cyclical, temporary, sometimes really difficult and hard world. See, life does have meaning when we view it as what it is. It's temporary. It's hevel. It's not eternal. But believe that your temporary life can have an eternal impact on those around you. And so in a moment, Tracy's going to come up and she's going to lead us in taking communion together as we remember Jesus' temporary life here on this earth. He only lived 33 years, and he was crucified. But thank God he rose from the dead. And thank God that because of his death and resurrection, we have eternal life. And that's why each week here at Avenue, we remember and honor his death and resurrection by taking communion together with those communion cups and the seat backs in front of you. That cracker reminds us of his body broken. The juice reminds us of his blood that was shed on the cross for the forgiveness of my sins and yours. But right now, I want to take a moment of silence, give you a time just to hear from God, to reflect. What is he speaking to you this morning? What temporary thing in your life do you need to surrender to him and stop putting so much stake in it as an eternal thing and give it to him as a temporal thing? Allow him to use it in your life to have eternal impact. Let's take a moment now. Let's talk to God. The thoughts that you're thinking right now, believe God is speaking to you through his word and giving you his wisdom today. And my prayer for you as you hear those things, that through the power of the Holy Spirit inside of you, you would have the power and the strength and to follow his way and his wisdom this week. So let's be silent before the Lord now. Let's hear from him as he gives us his wisdom today. Lord, I praise you today. Now, things are hevel. I'm so thankful that things don't stay temporary forever. I'm thankful that you have a purpose for our eternity. And because of that, you give us a purpose right now in our temporary. Thank you for speaking to us today, Lord. Would you compel us to not only remember you and honor you, but to live for you so that others' eternities can be changed as well. We thank you, Jesus, and we love you. And we ask this in your name. Amen.